The moving truck rumbled to a stop just before sunrise, its engine cutting off with a soft sputter as the last rays of dawn touched the rooftops of Sycamore Lane. The neighborhood was picturesque in every sense: freshly cut lawns, symmetrical hedges, white mailboxes standing like sentinels along the curb. Wind chimes tinkled faintly in the breeze, and sprinklers hissed their morning rhythm over flower beds and sidewalks. It was the kind of place that appeared on real estate brochures with words like exclusive, peaceful, and tight-knit community. Inside the car parked behind the truck sat James and Lauren Bennett, along with their 10-year-old daughter, Maya. James gripped the steering wheel with one hand and smiled quietly to himself, his eyes fixed on the two-story brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was theirs now, the result of years of saving, sacrifice, and stubborn hope. Lauren glanced over at him with a kind of reverent disbelief, her hand finding his. In the back seat, Maya leaned forward between them, wide-eyed and grinning. "Is this really it?" she asked. "Our house?" James nodded. "It's home now," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes shone with something deeper: relief, pride, a flicker of nervous anticipation. They stepped out of the car together, breathing in the crisp morning air as the moving crew opened the truck. The family began unloading boxes marked with bold handwriting: kitchen, Maya's room, linens. A golden retriever barked from a few houses down. Birds flitted between trees. A man jogged past with earbuds in, barely glancing at them. It all seemed normal, maybe even welcoming for the first few minutes. Then the door of the house across the street creaked open. A white man in his 60s stepped out, wearing a neatly pressed robe and holding a steaming mug of coffee. He stared directly at the Bennetts for a long moment, too long to be polite. His expression didn't shift. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply watched. Lauren noticed first. She nudged James subtly, and he followed her gaze. "Morning," James offered, raising a hand. The man took a sip of his coffee, then slowly walked to the edge of his driveway. "New neighbors?" he said, not unkindly, but with a tone that dripped with something else. Something cooler, more calculated. That's right," Lauren said, stepping forward with her best neighborly smile. "We just moved in from Brookfield." The man looked over the moving truck, then at James. "Huh, didn't know the Johnsons were selling to—" "Well, never mind." James's smile didn't fade, but it settled into something more measured. "We're happy to be here." There was a pause. Then the man said it, the words as casual as they were sharp. "You people don't usually move into neighborhoods like this." Lauren blinked. Maya, halfway down the driveway with a box in her arms, froze. James kept his tone level. "We're just people, looking for a safe place to raise our daughter, like everyone else." The man stared at him for another second, then shrugged and turned around without another word, disappearing back into his house. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Not loud, not dramatic, just dense. The kind of silence that planted itself under your skin and stayed there. Lauren swallowed hard. She looked at James, who was already kneeling beside Maya, helping her with the box. His face was unreadable, but his hands moved gently. "You okay, baby?" he asked softly. Maya nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Yeah," she said too quickly. James stood and took the box from her. "Then let's make this house ours." They continued unloading. The sun rose higher. Neighbors came and went. A few waved half-heartedly, most avoided eye contact. A woman walking her dog passed by and didn't return the family's hello. At noon, a different man 2 doors down brought out his garbage and paused just long enough to glance at the Bennetts before turning back inside. It wasn't overt. No one shouted. No one threatened. But the message was clear, written in the glances and the silence and the carefully measured distance. You are not what we expected. You are not what we wanted. James never said anything. He kept unpacking. He set up the bed in Maya's room, hung curtains in the living room, helped Lauren organize the kitchen. Every action was deliberate. Every smile to a passing neighbor was an act of defiance wrapped in kindness, because they had worked too hard to be here, and no amount of unwelcome stares was going to send them back. The days that followed were lined with politeness so thin, it cracked under the weight of its own insincerity. Each morning, James left early for work, dressed in his usual sharp slacks and pressed shirt, briefcase in hand, nodding to neighbors as he walked down the driveway to his car. Most nodded back, but only slightly, as if even that gesture cost them more than they were willing to give. Lauren stayed home, setting up the house, helping Maya adjust to her new school, and doing her best to create a sense of normalcy. She planted flowers along the walkway and waved at passing dog walkers. But her greetings were met with tight smiles or distracted glances. A few people crossed the street rather than walk directly in front of their home. On the third day, while Maya played chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk, a group of children rode by on their bikes. One of them, a freckled boy with red hair, slowed down as he passed and said loudly to the others, "That's the new girl. My mom says they're probably renting." The others didn't laugh, but they didn't correct him either. Maya turned her face away and erased part of her drawing with the side of her foot. Lauren watched from the porch, her heart tightening as she stood slowly and called Maya in for lunch. Inside the house, the air was calm, but the silence between them had begun to hold weight. Lauren pretended not to notice the way Maya had stopped talking about school, how she suddenly didn't want to ride her bike unless one of them came along, how she said fine a little too quickly when asked about her day. That Friday, Lauren attended a PTA welcome coffee at the elementary school. She arrived early, dressed professionally, hopeful. But as she stepped into the multi-purpose room, the subtle choreography began. Conversation slowed slightly. Heads turned. She received a few smiles, brief and polished, but no one made space for her at the tightly packed tables. She eventually sat alone at the edge of the room with a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. One woman, a blonde in a pastel cardigan, approached halfway through the meeting. "Hi, you're Maya's mom, right?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Lauren. It's so nice to meet you." The woman smiled tightly. "Welcome. I'm sure it's a big change coming into a community like this. We're very close-knit." Lauren smiled. "That's exactly what we were looking for." The woman's eyes flicked down to Lauren's purse, then back up. "Well, just be patient. It can take some time for everyone to adjust. People here tend to value familiarity." Lauren thanked her and said nothing else. The woman walked away moments later, returning to her group, which resumed their quiet conversations and easy laughter. Lauren sat alone for the rest of the meeting, then left as quickly as politeness allowed. At home, James was already in the kitchen unpacking groceries when she walked in. He looked up, immediately sensing something in the set of her shoulders. "How was it?" he asked. Lauren didn't answer right away. She put her bag down, exhaled slowly, and said, "You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everything keeps moving, but you're the only one not moving with it?" James didn't respond with words. He simply walked over and pulled her into a hug. She rested her head against his chest for a long moment. Neither said what they were both thinking. This isn't new, but it still hurts. That weekend, they attended their first HOA meeting in the community center. The room was filled with folding chairs and clipped voices. James introduced himself and Lauren when prompted, smiling warmly, even as the woman beside him shifted her seat ever so slightly away. Maya sat quietly in the back with a book, while the adults discussed neighborhood speed limits and lawn height codes with intense interest. When James stood to volunteer for a local cleanup committee, a man across the room muttered under his breath, "We'll see how long that lasts." A few chuckles followed. James pretended not to hear. Lauren didn't move, but her fingers dug gently into the armrest of her chair. The next morning, a letter appeared in their mailbox. It was unsigned, printed in block font, no return address. It read, "Please be mindful of keeping noise to a minimum. This is a peaceful neighborhood. We expect new residents to be respectful." The implication wasn't subtle. They hadn't had any parties, no loud music, nothing but Maya laughing in the backyard and James grilling dinner 2 nights prior. That was all it took. James folded the letter carefully and slid it into a drawer. They spoke little that night. Lauren helped Maya with homework, and James fixed a loose cabinet door. The television played quietly in the background, but none of them were really watching. The mood in the house had shifted from excitement to caution, not fear, just alertness, the kind that lived in the bones of every black family that had ever been told, in 100 ways, that they were welcome only as long as they didn't disturb the shape of someone else's comfort. And still, despite it all, they made dinner together. Maya said grace. They laughed once, maybe twice. They cleaned the dishes and turned out the lights and went to bed like any other family, determined, exhausted, and trying not to let the weight of unspoken hostility settle too deep into the walls of their new home. The following week settled into an uneasy rhythm, like a house built on shifting ground. The Bennetts moved through their days with quiet efficiency, their smiles polite but practiced, their voices warm but careful. There was no open conflict, no shouting matches or blatant slurs. Instead, the neighborhood's discomfort manifested in smaller, subtler ways. The things that could be explained away if ever questioned. but that collectively told a very different story. James kept a notebook in his nightstand drawer, thin and unmarked, where he began to record what he saw and heard. Not to weaponize it, but to document it, to make visible what others would deny. He wrote in it late at night when the house was quiet and Lauren and Maya were asleep. He documented the sideways glances, the neighborhood watch car parked a little too long near their house, the way packages delivered to their porch were mysteriously opened or delayed. He didn't write with anger. He wrote with precision, the same way he used to write contracts and site inspection reports before he launched his own firm. If people were going to erase them with silence, then he would counter it with evidence. Lauren, meanwhile, focused on community involvement. She signed up to help at Maya's school library once a week and volunteered for the parent planning committee. She baked cookies for the fundraiser and delivered them herself, smiling as she handed the neatly wrapped tray to the coordinator, who accepted them with a forced grin and a stiff nod, placing them behind a table full of store-bought cupcakes that would later be sold first. No one asked for her recipe. No one asked for her name. Despite it all, Lauren kept showing up. She smiled through the silence and listened attentively during meetings. She took notes. She introduced herself again and again until her name began to stick. Not warmly, but unavoidably. Maya had the hardest time, though she rarely said so. She came home from school quieter than usual. When asked about her day, she answered with a practiced, "Fine," followed by a quick retreat to her room. One afternoon, Lauren found her carefully erasing the name Maya B. from the top corner of a worksheet and rewriting it more neatly, as if presentation alone could shift perception. When Lauren asked what she was doing, Maya just shrugged. "I want my teacher to see I'm trying really hard," she said. It was Thursday when Maya came home with a crumpled paper in her backpack and handed it wordlessly to Lauren. It was a copy of her essay titled, "What Fairness Means to Me." The rubric at the bottom showed a perfect score. At the top, in red ink, was written, "Excellent work." But when Lauren asked if it had been announced in class, Maya hesitated before shaking her head. She said we didn't have time today. That evening, James sat with Maya at the dining table and read the essay aloud. His voice was steady, proud, filled with quiet emotion as Maya's words spilled into the space between them. She had written about playground rules and about how it wasn't fair when someone cut in line and the teacher didn't see. She wrote about how fairness meant listening, even if you didn't understand someone's story. She wrote about how her mom said kindness was more powerful than anger, and how her dad said respect is something you carry, even when no one hands it to you. When he finished, Lauren wiped her eyes. "You're going to be heard, baby," James said gently to Maya, "even if it's not today, even if it's not by everyone. Your words matter." Maya smiled, but it was small, tentative. That night, James added a new entry to his notebook. Maya. Essay praised privately, ignored publicly. Teacher avoided eye contact at pickup. Noted pattern of exclusion, both social and academic. He paused before closing the book. His hand rested for a moment on the final line he'd written. Then he underlined it once. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully beneath motion-activated porch lights and manicured trees. Lawn signs that read, "In this house, we believe in kindness," stood proudly in front of homes where no one had ever bothered to speak more than a sentence to the Bennetts. But inside their house, the Bennetts weren't asking for anyone's belief. They weren't waiting for permission to belong. They were watching, enduring, planting their presence like a seed in soil that resisted them, knowing full well that growth sometimes begins in silence. And still, they stayed. Still, they built a life, one note, one word, one meal at a time. Because survival wasn't their goal. It never had been. They had come to live, and they weren't going anywhere. The tipping point arrived not with a scream or confrontation, but with paper, thin, anonymous, and cruel in its precision. It was Saturday morning when Lauren stepped outside to check the mail. The air was warm and soft, the kind that wrapped around your skin like a quiet promise of spring. Maya was inside coloring at the kitchen table, and James was assembling a garden bed for the backyard. The kind of morning that should have been easy, peaceful, unremarkable. Lauren opened the mailbox, pulled out a few circulars, and then paused. Wedged between two coupon flyers was a plain white envelope, unmarked, sealed loosely, clearly hand-delivered. There was no return address, no name. The envelope wasn't sealed tight, just folded at the edges like a message passed in class. Lauren opened it casually at first, not expecting anything, not anticipating what it would say. But the moment her eyes found the text inside, her breath caught. Printed in all caps on a single sheet of white paper, In stark black ink were the words, "This neighborhood was better before you people came." That was all. No signature, no demand. Just a sentence. Blunt, cold, deliberate. For a long moment, Lauren didn't move. Her hands gripped the paper, but her arms hung limp at her sides. The birds were still chirping. A lawnmower buzzed faintly in the distance. A car drove by, its tires soft against the pavement. But all of it felt suddenly far away, like sound underwater. She walked back into the house slowly, her feet moving with the awkward stiffness of someone in shock. James looked up from the sliding door as she came in. His face shifted immediately. He could read the language of her body before a word was spoken. He stepped forward, wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes locked on hers. "What happened?" he asked gently. Lauren said nothing at first. She simply handed him the paper. He read it once and his jaw tightened. His fingers curled just slightly, but his voice remained level. "Where was it?" "In the mailbox." "Envelope?" She nodded. "No return, just folded." Maya looked up from the table. "What's wrong?" she asked. Lauren forced a smile and turned away from the window. "Nothing, baby," she said, her voice too soft, too bright. "Just junk mail." James stepped out onto the porch alone. He stood there for several minutes, scanning the street. The houses around him looked just as they had the day before. Sprinklers clicking, wind chimes dancing. Nothing suspicious, nothing obvious. But that was always the point. These things never came from the loudest mouths. They came from the quiet ones, the ones who smiled politely in daylight and whispered in the dark. He walked back in and closed the door quietly behind him. Lauren was standing at the kitchen counter now, gripping its edge with both hands. Her head was bowed slightly, and her shoulders trembled just once, barely. But James saw it. He approached slowly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him without resistance, her breath shaky against his chest. "I knew it might happen," she said. "I prepared myself for it. I thought I was prepared." James didn't say anything right away. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "We don't deserve this," she whispered. "No," he said. "We don't." He turned the paper over and laid it flat on the counter. Then he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of it. Afterward, he folded it carefully and placed it in a new folder with the other things he'd been documenting. But this time, his hands moved more slowly. This time, it wasn't just about proving a pattern. This time, it was about protecting his family. That evening, when Maya had gone to bed, they sat together in the backyard, the solar lights casting a soft glow over the new flower beds Lauren had planted. The stars were starting to come out, and the night air was cooler now. James sat forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, looking at the dark outline of the street beyond the fence. "I think it's time we stopped just enduring," he said finally. Lauren looked over at him. "I mean it," he continued. "We've been trying to make them comfortable with us. Smiling, staying quiet, making ourselves small, but they're not the ones who need comforting." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time we remind them who we are." Lauren held his gaze. There was no anger in his voice, just clarity, resolve. The same kind of calm she'd seen in him when he walked into business meetings, where no one expected him to be the one leading the table. The same calm that got him through building a firm from nothing. The calm of a man who understood that change didn't begin with rage, it began with direction. "What do we do?" she asked. James leaned back and looked up at the sky for a moment, then down at the glowing house they had built piece by piece, even as it tried to resist them. "We open our doors," he said. "Literally, we invite them in." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "They think they know us," James said, "but they've never seen us." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's show them." The invitation began as a simple idea. Quiet but deliberate. James drafted the wording one morning at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while the sun warmed the windows. He didn't want it to sound defensive or desperate or overly sweet. He wanted it to be clear, confident, welcoming. It read, "The Bennetts invite you and your family to an afternoon of food, music, and community. Saturday, 3 p.m. in our backyard. All neighbors welcome." He and Lauren printed 25 copies on thick, cream-colored paper with navy blue lettering. Clean and elegant, just enough weight to signal that this was not a casual gesture. It was a statement, wrapped in hospitality. Lauren folded them neatly into envelopes, and James, dressed in his work slacks and button-down, hand-delivered each one house by house, walking with calm purpose down Sycamore Lane. Some homeowners weren't home. He slid the envelope into their mail slots or wedged it between the door handles. Some answered with cautious smiles, surprised to see him on their porch without a clipboard or complaint, just holding an invitation with a nod. Others accepted it with thin, uncertain expressions, saying, "Oh, thank you," before quickly stepping back inside. A few, like the retired couple across the street, barely opened their door more than 3 inches and took the envelope without a word. James didn't explain. He didn't ask for confirmation. He simply handed each one over, looked them in the eye, and said, "We hope to see you there." Then he moved on. Lauren handled the planning with the precision of an event coordinator. She ordered folding tables and outdoor chairs, arranged for a local food truck to cater a mix of southern barbecue and vegetarian fare, and organized yard games for the kids. Maya helped make signs that read, "Welcome," and "All our family here," decorating them with bright markers and doodles of hearts and musical notes. They strung solar lights through the trees and cleaned every inch of the patio. James even built a small stage area out of plywood in case someone wanted to perform. He wasn't expecting much, but he wanted to make space for something good, just in case. By Friday night, their backyard looked like something out of a summer magazine spread. The grill gleamed, the lawn was trimmed, coolers were filled with water and lemonade. A speaker system was set up in the corner, ready to play a curated playlist of jazz, R&B, and classic soul. There were bubbles for the kids. There were enough chairs for the reluctant, and there was room for anyone who might decide, at the last minute, that they were curious enough to come. Saturday morning arrived warm and clear. The sky held that soft golden hue that made everything glow. Lauren stood in the kitchen finishing the last of the lemonade, while James adjusted the banner above the back gate that read simply, "You're welcome here." Maya hovered at the sliding door, dressed in her favorite yellow sundress, sneakers, double-knotted, nervously watching the backyard like it might change if she stared long enough. The clock inched toward 3 out. No one had arrived. By 3:15, the food truck had opened its window and the smell of smoked brisket and grilled vegetables wafted into the breeze. Still no one. James paced slowly across the lawn, straightening chairs that didn't need straightening. Lauren wiped down an already spotless table. Maya sat with her chin in her hands, watching the side gate. At 3:23, the latch clicked. A woman entered first, short, silver-haired, wearing oversized sunglasses and a linen blouse. Behind her was a tall man in a tucked-in polo, holding a pie dish awkwardly with both hands. They looked uncertain, but they smiled. "Hi," the woman said. We're the Remingtons, from 2 houses down." James's smile was genuine, immediate. "We're so glad you're here. Please come in. Make yourselves at home." The next to arrive were the Hernandez family, parents and 3 children, drawn by the music and the scent of grilled food. Then, a young couple from the end of the block. Then another older man James recognized but had never spoken to, who muttered something about always meaning to say hello. By 4, there were nearly 30 people scattered across the yard. Children laughed as they tossed beanbags into cornhole boards. Neighbors hovered near the grill, tasting sauces and debating spice levels. Someone connected their phone to the speaker and started playing Al Green, which drew more smiles than expected. Chairs were pulled closer together. The lemonade needed refilling. For the first time since moving in, the Bennett's home felt like a part of the neighborhood, rather than just a fixture on its edge. Lauren moved gracefully between groups, answering questions about the garden, complimenting earrings, refilling drinks. Maya found herself surrounded by other kids, drawing chalk patterns on the patio. James took a moment to stand at the edge of it all and watch, not out of pride, but with cautious hope. He still didn't know who had written that letter. Maybe they were among the smiling faces now. Maybe they weren't. But today, for the first time, it didn't matter. Because the story was no longer just about what had been said in the shadows. It was about what they chose to do in the open. And what they chose was to invite the neighborhood into something different. Something bigger than fear. Something stronger than silence. Belonging not requested, but offered. Not demanded, but built. One plate, one smile. One gesture at a time. The shift did not arrive all at once. It came gradually, subtly, like the way morning sunlight creeps across a cold kitchen floor. Slow but certain. Quiet but undeniable. By the following week, Sycamore Lane felt different. Not completely changed, not entirely softened, but adjusted in a way that was impossible to ignore. The Bennett's backyard gathering had rippled outward beyond the afternoon, beyond the smiles and plates and lemonade. It had touched something in people that even they hadn't expected to be moved. Not everyone who had been invited had come, but everyone had heard about it. And more importantly, many had heard what it felt like to be there, what it felt like to be welcomed not because of shared history or common culture, but because someone simply chose to open the gate. On Monday morning, James left the house in his usual crisp attire, briefcase in hand, and was surprised to see the Remingtons outside again, this time with their dog on a leash. The woman, Margaret, waved first. "Good morning, James," she called. He paused, blinked, then smiled warmly. "Good morning." Her husband, George, gave him a nod. "That brisket was incredible," he said. "You'll have to tell me where you got it." James chuckled softly. "Secret recipe. I'll trade it for your pie." The three of them laughed lightly, and something loosened in James's chest, something he hadn't realized had been tight. Lauren, too, noticed the difference. When she arrived at the school library to volunteer on Tuesday, the PTA coordinator, Deborah, the woman in the pastel cardigan who had once barely acknowledged her, greeted her with an actual smile and offered her a clipboard. "We could really use your help organizing the spring book fair," she said. "You seem like the kind of person who gets things done." Lauren accepted the clipboard and the compliment with equal grace, though part of her still listened closely, watched carefully, waiting to see if this shift would hold or vanish the moment it was tested. Maya was perhaps the most visibly changed. At school, the same children who once whispered or stared now waved as she passed in the hallway. One of them, a boy named Elliot, brought her a drawing of a dragon and said, "I liked your chalk art at the party. Want to help me design something for the class mural?" Maya said yes without hesitation, her eyes shining in a way Lauren hadn't seen in weeks. Later that evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Maya chatted nonstop about the mural project and asked if she could bring cookies to share with her classmates. Lauren promised to bake them fresh, and James gave her a high five across the table. It was a small moment, but full of joy, clean, unfiltered, unburdened joy. And then, something neither of them had expected happened. On Thursday, as James returned from a site visit in the city, he pulled into the driveway and saw a familiar figure waiting on the sidewalk in front of the house. It was the older white man from across the street, the one who had made that first cold remark when they moved in. Mr. Hanley. He stood stiffly, holding something in his hands, a manila envelope. James parked, got out of the car, and approached slowly. "Afternoon," James said. Mr. Hanley gave a small nod. He didn't meet James's eyes at first. Then he cleared his throat. "I didn't come to cause any trouble," he began. I wanted to bring you this." He extended the envelope. James hesitated for a second, then took it. "What is it?" Mr. Hanley looked embarrassed, out of place in his own skin. "Photos of the neighborhood from the 70s. My wife used to take pictures of every house, every tree she planted. Thought your daughter might like to see what it looked like before. It's not much, but it's history." James opened the envelope and saw dozens of faded prints, families standing in front of porches, children riding bikes on cracked sidewalks, trees barely taller than a person, now towering above roofs. "Thank you," James said sincerely. "She'll love this." Mr. Hanley nodded again, then paused. "I said something when you moved in," he said quietly. "Something I shouldn't have said. I was wrong. About you, about your family. I just wanted you to know that." James didn't rush to accept the apology. He stood there, letting the man's words settle. He knew that people often said they were sorry when they were uncomfortable, not always when they were changed. But something in Mr. Hanley's posture, his stillness, his quiet, felt honest. "I appreciate that," James said. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." Mr. Hanley looked up then. His eyes were a little wet. "You did something I didn't think could be done," he said. "You made this place better by not leaving." James simply nodded. "That was never part of the plan." That night, James showed Maya the photos, and she laughed at the old cars and the funny clothes, pointing out houses that now looked completely different. Lauren placed them in a scrapbook, page by page, like adding roots to the ground beneath their feet. They didn't speak of the letter again, not directly. It remained in the folder, now tucked away in a drawer that also held blueprints, bills, and future plans. The neighborhood had not become perfect overnight. There were still faces that avoided theirs, still moments of subtle tension. But the ice had cracked. The silence had thinned. A new tone had entered the air. one that did not erase the past, but allowed space for a different future. And the Bennets, seated together beneath soft lamplight, understood something that could not be written into a welcome guide or carved into a sign. They belonged not because others finally accepted them. They belonged because they never let anyone convince them they didn't. It was nearly 2 months after the backyard gathering when the truth surfaced, not through spectacle or confrontation, but in the form of a story told humbly, in passing, in front of the very people who had once chosen silence over connection. It was a Saturday morning, bright and full of the sounds of lawnmowers and dogs barking from behind white fences. The Bennets had been invited to attend the monthly Homeowners Association meeting, not just as guests, but as contributors. Lauren had been asked to speak briefly about organizing community activities for the summer. James had agreed to help evaluate proposed updates to the neighborhood's public green space. Maya was tagging along, a spiral notebook in hand, drawing the room around her in real time. The meeting was held in the clubhouse at the end of Sycamore Lane, a low brick building with outdated carpet and folding chairs, where neighbors gathered to sip lukewarm coffee and vote on property line disputes and fencing rules. This time, though, the room held a different energy. The Bennets were greeted warmly. The Remingtons saved them seats. Mr. Hanley nodded to them from across the room. Even Deborah from the PTA gave Lauren a little wave and whispered something about collaborating on a summer social. After the usual business, budget updates, event planning, a complaint about someone's porch lights being too bright, Lauren stood to speak. She addressed the room with ease, her tone warm but clear, her words centered on unity in small, joyful ways to bring people together. Ice cream socials, outdoor movie nights, walking groups. The audience nodded, smiled, some even took notes. It was an image of progress, of neighborliness reborn. Then someone asked James if he would be willing to share a bit more about his background, since several people hadn't yet had a chance to really talk with him. James, seated at the edge of the room, glanced at Lauren, who gave him the smallest of nods. He stood slowly, calmly, hands in his pockets. He didn't raise his voice or take on a formal tone. He just began to speak. "I'm a licensed architect," he said. "I run a firm that focuses on community-focused development. We do schools, libraries, community centers, spaces for people to grow in, spaces that reflect the lives around them. A few months ago, my team won a city contract to lead the renovation of the downtown civic center. We'll be adding green space, repurposing abandoned buildings for youth programs, and creating an open-plan library with tech access." There was a pause in the room, not out of shock, but out of recalibration. Some people leaned forward. Others blinked slowly, realizing they had made assumptions that were now unraveling right in front of them. "And before that," James continued, "I served in the U.S. Army. 8 years. Engineering division. I've lived on 3 continents. I've built things under stress most people will never experience. But honestly, nothing's been more challenging or more important than what I've been building here. With my wife, with our daughter, in this neighborhood." His voice was steady, almost quiet, but it carried. "We moved here to be part of something," he said, "not to change it, not to provoke it, just to live in it, to raise our daughter somewhere safe, somewhere with trees and sidewalks and people who wave when they see you." And at first, not everyone waved, and we noticed. No one spoke. The room was still. No one needed to ask what he meant. "But I also know," he said, "that change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with a plate of food, or a drawing in chalk, or a single neighbor showing up when it counts. That's all we've ever tried to be here, present." He looked around the room, not challenging them, but inviting them. "And the truth is, we never needed to prove anything. But you needed to see it. Not because of us, but because of you." Then he sat down. There was a silence that followed, dense and full, but not uncomfortable. A man in the second row cleared his throat and muttered, "Well said." A woman near the back clapped softly. Soon more hands joined in. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Later, as the meeting wrapped up, several people came forward, some asking questions about the Civic Center project, others sharing compliments or awkward apologies hidden in casual conversation. A few mentioned their own military service, their own desire to get more involved. The tone had shifted and it stayed shifted. That afternoon, back at home, Lauren sat on the front porch with Maya, looking through the photos Mr. Hanley had brought weeks earlier. James worked in the yard, moving soil to expand the garden bed. People passed by, and many of them waved now without hesitation. One woman dropped off a plate of cookies. A group of kids ran by shouting Maya's name, asking if she could come play. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at times, but it was happening. The unraveling of distance, the weaving of something new. Not just tolerance, not just performance, but connection. Earned, grown, watered like the flowers in Lauren's beds, with patience and resolve. And as the sun lowered behind the houses of Sycamore Lane, casting golden light across driveways and windows, it illuminated something deeper than belonging. It revealed the truth that had always been there. They weren't exceptions to the neighborhood. They were the standard rising.